Welcome to the BookBlast podcast, which showcases the best writing from around the world, not only for adults, but also for young adults and children. So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming, and welcome to this month's Translation Book Club, at which we're featuring Warsaw Tales, edited and translated by Antonia Lloyd-Jones.
Hello.
Just published in September by Oxford University Press. It's a collection of 12 stories. It includes, of course, Nobel Prize winner Olga Tokarczuk, whose story Che Guevara has never been published in English before, and Antonia is her translator. The reader navigates the city's history through the stories, also goes on their own literary tour, taking in people and places of particular resonance. There are illustrations and a map at the back. They are a very interesting mixture of writers and stories. I will turn to Antonia. Can you first of all go through the list of names?
This book starts with Bolesław Prus, because I decided to go back just about 100 years when I was first commissioned to do the book. And Bolesław Prus is best known for his novel Lalka the Doll, which is the classic Warsaw novel. But the story I chose is from right at the end of his life, and he wrote it in 1920, and few people remember that he lived that long. And he wrote very good short stories which have been largely ignored, certainly in English. And then I have Maria Kuncevichova. I did a thing to myself with this book. I was commissioned to put the book together by Oxford University Press, who have a series called City Tales. So they wanted to have Warsaw Tales, and most of these books feature capital cities and the stories about one particular city or setting. And I thought, well, Warsaw isn't really like other capital cities because it's had such a checkered history. It's been totally destroyed and like a phoenix risen from the ashes. And it's just not like Paris or London or all these places that just sort of...
Because indeed it's been both invaded and also it was flattened by the Nazis in World War II. So it's not only... It's a horrendous combination of invasions and bombing, isn't it, really?
It's
an amazing
epicenter of the Second World War in many ways. And think about the Warsaw Ghetto and all this. So I thought, I'm going to make myself... I thought of it as a sort of straitjacket in the end, because I imposed some rules on myself. I thought, okay, I'm going to try and tell some of this history through these stories. I'm going to try and feature some people who've never been translated. I'm going to try and have as many female writers as I can, which is always trickier than it sounds. And also just show a range of different writing and give a sense of some of the things that Polish literature can do. Because, of course, inevitably there is quite a lot about the war and about the Holocaust, but you don't want that to be the only thing. No. And so I was being careful also to give balance to it. Maria Kuncevichova was a writer who actually left Poland and spent a lot of time in this country and in the States and wrote all sorts of novels. She's having a little bit of a revival, I'm glad to say. But I chose a piece of hers which is reportage, really, and it's a very cynical piece. It's about the zoo in Warsaw, and it's a sort of critique of the society in the interwar period. Then we have Jarosław Iwaszkiewicz, is known as a poet, and he also wrote plays, but he was the ultimate short story writer. He wrote hundreds.
What period?
Well, he died in the 1980s even, I think. So he's the 20th, but he had a long life. I think he's a genius, and I love his work, and I have translated a collection of his stories before now, but I'd love to do more. And again, it's hard to persuade publishers to take short stories by writers that people haven't heard of, sadly.
But that also is why, I mean, as a publisher, I did a series of anthologies.
Right.
As an agent,
yes,
I agented anthologies. As an editor, I have edited anthologies. And I know it's from, from Cuba when I was a publisher to Empire Windrush as an agent, which got Empire Windrush going. The editor was at The Voice. He was editor of The Voice newspaper. Then later France, Excité with HarperCollins. So you have big names bringing the little ones. So like you've got Olga Tokarczuk here.
Yes.
And what is great is it opens a huge window. Everyone else piles in afterwards. Exactly. That is the concept, and you are the perfect person, Madame Poland, as far as
I did use it. I mean, I know Olga Tokarczuk's work very well because Jennifer Croft and I both translate her, and I've worked with her for 20-something years, nearly 30 years. And
she got the Nobel, which helps.
And there's lots of sort of backlog of short stories that haven't come out in English, although Jennifer and I have done quite a lot. And I knew there was this wonderful story about when she was a clinical psychology student in Warsaw during the student strikes in 1981. And it's a fantastic story because it's true. Because she really did, as a student, the students had to keep an eye on certain patients who were out in the community, but who every now and then really needed to go into hospital. So she would she had a list of people she had to meet up with and just make sure they were ticking over all right. And they feature in the story.
Because it's very touching, though, the Che Guevara. For once, he thinks he's Che Guevara, not Napoleon. Slight difference, which is... But also, she actually ends up going to his flat, and she spends the night there.
Well, she gets trapped.
No, she gets trapped. But I mean, yeah, but
it really happens.
But it's actually rather touching. There's something very touching, and the way you see how she writes it so beautifully, how he's completely mad.
The world is mad that she's in, because there's all these strikes happening, and nobody really knows where it's going, and the whole place seems to have gone mad. And there she is dealing with people who are sort of on paper mad. And sometimes what they say makes more sense than what's going on around her. It's the most extraordinary piece of writing. And it is based on her personal experience. Where I always wanted to ask her, Olga, how much of this really happened to you? And she said, well, actually, I didn't have to make anything up for once. So I love it when I see writers processing their life into literature. It's the most fascinating. It's one of you get a sort of ringside seat as a translator. She's like a magpie. She picks up bits and pieces. It's very dangerous to tell you your ideas because you'll see them in a book and there's one word. So Ludwig Hering was not famous as a writer at all, but he was a great friend of Józef Czapski, who was a famous painter and writer, and he performed a very strange theatre show with a very famous writer called Miron Białaszewski and with Hering's niece. They did a sort of front room theatre with just the three of them doing the most extraordinary surreal theatre shows. But he, sometime during the war, he was stuck in Warsaw during the war and had various terrible things happen to him. So Iwaszkiewicz had a story about the war, but Hering, I thought, I have to get the Jewish ghetto in somehow. And he had a flat for some time where he could see the ghetto gates. And he realised that there were children going in and out, keeping their families alive by coming out during the day, sneaking out of holes in the wall or evading the guards, and bringing food back. And they always came back. And this story, short story, it's you can tell it's completely true. And he wrote, there's a one volume with 4 stories about the ghetto that he wrote. And I picked this one because it's a shorter one, but it's also about these children. So I found that very moving. Zofia Petersowa, no one on earth has heard of her at all in Poland. And the reason why I know about her existence at all is that my friend Mariusz Ścigiel, well-known reportage writer in Poland and runs the Reportage Institute, and he has done the anthology to end all anthologies, which is a 3-volume whopper like this, and it fills up half my bookshelf, of Polish reportage. And in one of these books, he had a fantastic description of the beginning of the war by this woman. And when I was looking for ideas, I was asking people in Poland who are well placed to give me good ideas. And he said that he thought this woman had written some short stories. And he had this huge box full of all the research books he'd put together for his anthology. And he kind of dug around and pulled out one of those books that's got sort of marbled covers because it's falling apart. And here are these stories. The book's called Odwet, which means revenge. And this story, to me, it's about essentially life in Warsaw during the war, before the uprising and after. So it stretches to just after the war, when people were coming back to this bombed out city and how they felt. And it's got a very positive ending. I'm not going to spoil the story, but I just felt it was a good note to end the war on. So then Marek Łasko was a very cynical writer. Everything he wrote was about negative people and disillusioned people. And that's a rather cynical story, and I included it because in Warsaw, it always seems to me important in Polish cities that there are allotment gardens. And I know we have them in London, but they're not right in the middle of things so much as they are in Warsaw. And they have a very strong character. And our ones are just sort of patches with vegetables and food, but theirs always have a little, what they call an altanka. It's like a little summer house. And sometimes people will stay the night there in the summer and so on. And it's a kind of institution that I felt was important to include as a feature of that city. So the story is set there, but it's a negative story about some horrid people being horrid to someone. But,
Yeah.
but it's also quite interesting. And then Kazimierz Orłoś, he must be in his 90s now. He's still alive, and he's a fantastic writer who's again been completely overlooked and no one's taken any notice of him. He wrote wonderful short stories, and I felt that the Palace of Culture had to feature in this book somewhere.
Okay.
Everyone recognises this building. The way he presents the building takes quite a cynical view of the communist era.
Yeah,
Because this was Stalin's gift to the Poles. It was a way of saying, we're watching you. It's Big Brother's gift. And there's still a great deal of argument over whether it should be got rid of or whether it should be turned into something else. And a lot of people are very unhappy with it still being there, dominating the city, this Russian implant. Then the story by Hannah Krall is called The Presence, and it's about... Again, it's about the ghetto, but it's about the area where the Warsaw Ghetto used to be. And about this is a true story. The Hannah Krall. She only writes reportage. She never writes anything that isn't the truth, but she presents it in a form that sounds very like fiction, very sparse writing. And this one came through Mariusz Ścigiel as well, because he used to present a television programme called On Every Topic. And he had this couple on the programme one day. It was a talk show. And they lived in a flat in Muranów, which is this area where the ghetto was. And they were worried that their house was haunted. And they had all this stuff they'd collected about the ghosts. So they went to the priest and got the priest in to exorcise their flat. The priest said, but you need a rabbi. So then a rabbi came. And this story is all about trying to find out what was on that site before the war. So then the next one is Antonia Lloyd-Jones, and this is a story about the building of Żoliborz. So this story bridges just before the Second World War right through to almost modern times, to the 1990s. And it's about a chap who, as a little boy, is taken by his uncle, who's an architect, building this new area in the north.
Uncle Oscar.
Yes, Uncle Oscar. And they go up this chimney tower of this boiler house. It's still there, the boiler house. And his uncle shows him the view of this new area that they're building. And then the war buffets the boy out of Poland, and he only comes back as a very old man and discovers that the uncle had a son, who is, of course, his cousin. And they go back to this same place. And the cousin tells him very, very cynically all about the communist era. So it kind of bridges to...
And isn't it also, there's the cinema, because it's unrecognisable. So there's an aspect, because there's another story about maps. So it's the way a city is obliterated, rebuilt, obliterated. And there's that very moving thing about the cinema.
Yes,
at the end.
Cinema's in there.
Yes,
the rainbow cinema.
The rainbow, it's rather lovely,
It's still there, and it's a functioning cinema.
Oh, is it still functioning?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah.
So, but this boiler house is now this very swish restaurant. And Anthony lives near there. Mm-hmm. So, and speaking of Metzel's story, I wanted to have something about the river, the Wisła, the Vistula River, because in Warsaw it's so noticeable. There's this great big river through the city, and unlike other capital cities where there are buildings right up on the embankment of rivers, Warsaw has beaches, and also in the Kunceviczova story there's this same thing comes up. And speaking of Metzel, describes how, as a boy, he liked to go fishing. And he would buy the map of Warsaw every year, they issued a new one. And he would go and find all these places to go fishing. And it's such an extraordinary thing that here you have this river where you can go right down and feel like you're in the countryside. And you're in the middle of a great big city. So I wanted to have that. And then Olga's story we already talked about a bit. And the final story, Krzysztof Varga. I wanted to close, as I had started, with a story in which somebody sees a strange vision. In the Proust story, people see visions of the past and of the future. And this last story, what happens is that a young man in 1990, so we're through into the present-day independent Poland, and he wakes up after a night out on the town, and he's really been rather overindulging. And he wakes up in
on
Three Crosses Square. Yes, on a bench. Yeah. And he is feeling somewhat fragile, to say the least. And everything's black and white. Something strange has happened. And what's actually happened, as you gradually realise, is that he's gone back in time to the 1950s. And these yobs come up and they threaten him. And the only money he's got is sort of a few zloty notes. And of course they're modern ones. So the yobs are deeply disappointed by this toy money as far as they're concerned. They don't recognise it. So they set about trying to beat him up. And then he gets defended by a mystery character someone comes to his defence
Who
he recognises character in a book.
He's a character in a book. Oh, so 'cause I wondered whether it was a ghost.
In
I
the
wasn't
book,
sure.
I think I've explained it somewhere, but
okay.
he's called the man with the white eyes in the book, or the
he's in the
evil
book.
one.
Okay, I thought,
So it's the return of the evil one. And there's a big mural at that square with a picture of him, because in the book, in the original book about him, he is a sort of vigilante who goes round dealing with hooligans and bandits. And our character, who's gone somehow back into time, not only into a time warp, but into a literary time warp, recognises him.
Thank you. That was what you
So
meant.
it's an awful lot.
Now, the conversation can begin. Who has read the book or would like to make some comments? Or translator, you translate as well, and you are from Poland, or you translated Polish? Or let's hear a bit your...
I lived in Poland
You've
for a
lived in
while,
Poland,
but I was mentored by Antonia. And the book, one of the books we were working on during the mentorship period was it's called Mirabelle. It's a children's book and it's set in Warsaw, and it's about a Mirabelle plum tree. Sort of the tree is sort of like the main character and speaks in the tree in the story, and it makes friends with a local child, and it kind of sees the city through the war and out the other side, and the child's descendants, and the tree gets destroyed at some point, but a seed of one of its the pit of one of its plums is sent to America with the child's, and comes back eventually and is replanted in Warsaw, and it's a real tree. We went to see.
Well, the tree is in this story by Hannah Krall as well. The same tree. That's where the author of that book got the idea. And they've recently replanted these trees. And Kate and I went to Warsaw we met with the author, and he took us to see where they had put these trees back in.
It's Mirabelle. They're the little plums.
The little yellow
and don't they
ones,
make
they're
they
lovely.
make white alcohol out of it, don't they? The French do,
I
anyway.
would be Polish
yes,
people
I think
here
somebody's
can
nodding.
tell us.
Sorry,
You make
a
a nalewka, or make some sort of vodka out of
It's
Mirabelle
not
plums.
the most popular nalewka
No,
from
no.
Mirabelle.
Again, looking actually at very European, yes, Mirabelle being whether it's Polish or French, the one where it's about the town planner and all the names of the streets change, that reminded me how in France they will change the names of avenues and streets. So if you look at a map that's 50 or 100 years old, the streets are completely different. It's interesting that in Poland they do that. So if you look at old maps, all the names are different. Well, they've had to because they've had to rebuild it. But even in a city that hasn't been rebuilt, they do it.
But there was
that very
it's
odd?
political.
It's the political.
So in Poland there would have been imperial names. Then there would have been the interwar names.
And then there's all the
Then there's
communist
the
heroes.
Nazi names.
Okay.
The Germans changed the names of streets. Then there's the communist names. And now we're back with the old names.
The old imperial or mixture? Have they kept?
No, they're the interwar.
Interwar.
The Second
okay.
Republic names. So we're back now with those.
Goodness.
But it's quite funny. You go to somewhere like Wilson Square, Platz Wilsona in Warsaw, which is Żoliborz. It's in that story.
Yeah.
And it's named after Woodrow Wilson. And during the communist era, it was called Paris Commune Square. But nobody ever, I never heard a soul call it that. Do you ever hear anyone called it? It was always Platz Wilsona. So when it was reinstituted, nobody really even noticed. But there were other streets where people found it rather hard to take the switch.
And that some of the cities in east of Poland had additional one other change of name, because this part of Poland was first taken by German, Soviets,
Russians.
then German. So except for Adolf Hitler Platz, there was a Stalin Platz, for example.
Recently had like Lech Kaczyński Street that was changed back
Really?
into the
God.
Aleja Stanów Zjednoczonych.
Right.
Oh
Do you
my
have
goodness.
any particular, are there any writers or stories in the collection or writers who you're particularly familiar with or particularly pleased to discover?
Well, I was a very sad story, almost Dickensian, and that's the Palace of Culture. I loved all the stories, but this particular one, it's really desperately sad story, and it's about a destitute family who, sort of there is, sort of a destitution from every which way. the domestic abuse by the husband, who actually abuses the children as well, though inwardly he loves them. But they moved actually right outside of Warsaw, on the outskirts, near the woods, and where the mother, who works as a cleaner, and she travels way back to center of Poland and back, and she barely, makes any money to last the month. And they've got barely 2 rooms, and so in one room you can actually just imagine there is the stove, and all 5 people live in that room, and they're only heat, and the temperature and the snow drops down way, and there is another room that is, the summer room, as they call it, but beautifully kind of described, this.
This is the 1950s,
Yes.
because
the
it's when
50s,
the Palace of Culture was being built.
Yes.
This symbol of the new Poland and all this rebuilding. But the idea, obviously, in the story is that it's got nothing to do with the reality that people were living.
Yes.
And then when they try and come and visit it, he was censored.
Was he?
The saddest thing is that the child, the youngest child, falls ill, seriously ill with pneumonia, and it's absolutely on the edge of death. When you think about it, the Soviet Union obviously impoverished even more so.
Yeah.
The poor people really, hit them hard. And mother cannot actually, she pays the doctor, but she cannot buy the medication.
Has anyone else got a particular story or writer from the collection
That has stayed in their head for more
or is
than
it, or the image?
I don't know how many people have
'cause I
had a
think
chance to
read
the
them all.
book.
Well,
No,
I
haven't
certainly.
had a chance yet. But
So-
Because then there are others. I mean, it's very clever because there are different styles but there are as I said, the big themes. It's for me anyway. There's very much
it's
the
nice.
resilience.
What you say is very
the war,
interesting.
just
yes.
zooming back, how managing to rebuild and then also obviously the horror of the politics. That's sort of like an awful thing that's just dumped on you, and
Something I love
it's
about
extraordinary.
This city. I love Warsaw, and when I first went there, it was the
So when did you
1980s,
first?
and it was pretty grim.
1980s.
It was not a good time because the solidarity movement had been crushed, and everybody felt this is it. We're stuck with this forever, this communism, and it was a very gloomy time. I'm sure the Polish people here know what I'm talking about, and but it has been so wonderful the last 25 years watching this city come back to life again, and I mean it's a very exciting modern place. Well, you can criticise some of it and say that this area looks ugly and all that, but it's got a lot of very beautiful areas, and I do admire, for instance, it's a very good symbol of Warsaw is this market, old town market square.
Oh, describe the mermaid. Actually, that's a
The
lovely
mermaid's
symbolism.
in the
so that's,
centre of it.
yeah.
She's the symbol of Warsaw, and this was 3 sides of this old square were destroyed by the Nazis. They ruined the old town, but then with difficulty, it was possible to rebuild the old city. Although the communists were resisting the kind of return of the old Poland. And it's so well done. The restoration is fantastically good. And it's very interesting. Warsaw's the only city in Europe with a medieval castle made of reinforced concrete. But what happened was that during the war, the royal castle has a great deal of treasure and art and so on in it. And during the war, the curators took all these paintings and things and hid them in their flats in the suburbs. And after the war, they still had all this stuff. Canaletto, who's famous for his paintings of Venice, had a nephew who was also his student, who was called Bernardo Bellotto, also known as Canaletto, sort of junior. And he painted, in the same style as Canaletto, these incredibly architectural pictures of Warsaw, because he was a court painter of Stanisław August, who was the last king of Poland. And these paintings were one of the things that was used to rebuild Warsaw, because they're so precise and, they're like architectural drawings. And it's quite remarkable. And you think of these paintings being hidden under somebody's granny's bed in the suburbs, and then after the war being used for this stupendously good reconstruction. And you walk around the old city and then you look up and it's some medieval building and it says 1973 and you think, whoa, it's just incredible. I've always admired that so much. And I always think of that as the first place to go to as a tourist, which is because I also conceive this as a sort of a guidebook.
Yeah,
and there's a map at the end.
That's
So you
very,
can go to the places and wander around
it's a literary
and
walk.
find them.
Yeah.
If you've got
If you want to. Well, if you want to.
But
Literary
there's a little
tours.
map and it tells you where each of the stories is set. That was another thing I set myself. I wanted them to be recognisable places. Every story had to have somewhere that you could identify on the
Pivotal.
map and go to. And that they needed to be quite spread out.
Editing an anthology, you do need certain parameters, because otherwise one is overwhelmed. Also, you can go on reading and reading and reading and reading forever, and you just
The one I have coming
Yeah.
out in March, which is
Is that-
190,000
Good
words.
Lord.
The Penguin Book of Polish Short Stories, that
Wow.
is.
We were talking about the Che Guevara short story against the backdrop of external chaos. But, I mean, wasn't here in the West, one did hear a lot about Solidarnosc and all that. I mean, was that not good? I mean, from a Polish point of view, and now looking, of course, with hindsight, Lech Walesa was the whole hero.
Well, it got
and
stomped on,
what
though.
was the-
As
what's the
at the
view- I
end
mean,
of
what's-
that story,
yes,
there are tanks
but what-
rolling across
exactly.
the bridge.
But was it not, again, the great Polish spirit that will not get crushed, etc., once one reads it?
absolutely.
How you all feel, I mean, about that, or is it, oh, well, that's,
Of the great Polish spirit.
no, yeah, okay.
We met through the great Polish spirit, didn't we?
Yes.
I translated a text
Yes.
about a pride march in a city where quite a risky thing to do.
Pride
in
march?
Białystok, which is how many years ago was it?
It must have been
2018 or
about
something?
4 years? No.
Not that long ago.
So,
And
Białystok.
Białystok, which
Which
is
is
in
near
the east, and it's
east.
a kind of conservative part of the country. So pride marches could be, not very well received. And this was heavily
You mean, hang on, the
over-policed.
hoodlums in the last story, which slightly made me think of A Clockwork Orange, Anthony Burgess.
Yeah.
That terrible scene at the
Yeah.
beginning when they all go and beat up an old tramp.
Well,
It made me think, and
yes.
all Graham Greene in Brighton Rock, the idea of these
Yes,
hoodlums going and attacking
absolutely.
people.
Serendipity is just amazing word. Okay, so I come from Białystok. I studied Polish literature in Warsaw, but when I'm back home, obviously there was a pride march in my city, so a couple of my friends were there as well, so I went. Among them was a Polish writer and poet, Jacek Denel. And so I was with my friends participating in this march. I took my
Your dog.
dachshund, little
Very
miniature dachshund, and you have to appreciate how it was. It was a lot of police presence. There were some anti-march vigilantes,
anti-LGBT, etc. Yeah.
indeed, and row of dogs, police dogs, Alsatians with police, so on
Oh my
both
goodness.
sides, and we were marching in the middle. And people were so sweet. Everybody was asking, "Oh, is your dachshund maybe too tired, or this and that?" The atmosphere was like, despite the context, the atmosphere of the participants was fabulous. It was great. Everyone was very nice. So this was my last day of summer holidays, and I went back to London, driving by car with my family, and we stopped over in Berlin. And what happened, I went to a club which is called Klub der Polnischen Versager, which means basically the club of Polish losers, more or less. It's
Club of Polish losers, well, that's
Yes,
jolly. Well,
it's
I suppose it gives you hope.
club.
You might become a winner, perhaps, one day.
Guess who I'm meeting there? I'm just for one day in the city.
Yeah, that's it.
Jacek
I'm bumping into Jacek Denel,
The writer.
who is sitting there. So I walk in and he says, "Oh, long time no see." And we are having a conversation, and then it turns out, I didn't realize, it is a meeting like our here today meeting.
Okay.
It's his launch of his book, translated into German. So I'm coming back, and a friend I'm back in London, and a friend calls me and says, "Oh, there is this article in The Guardian, you know." Ha ha ha. There is a lady with a dog in Białystok. I thought of you. And I'm like, because it is me.
It is me. Oh, I love it.
So,
There are books where if you read between the lines you can see.
Because that's the other thing I was going to ask about, how it might have created certain styles of writing or ways of writing around to avoid Stalin, famous for sending people off to the Gulag. Were the particular writers here who, as you said, they use sort of metaphor, imagery, or other sci-fi or other? Does that
Like
come into
I
your big
said,
book for Penguin?
Orwash
Have you got,
yes.
Yeah. So which of the writers particularly excelled in that?
Well, Orwash here didn't, so he got
Yeah.
banned.
He got banned, right? So what, he was banned,
He
and that
was
was it.
banned. So I don't think we've got particularly got examples of that here.
But in your bigger,
But the-
in the
yes.
big collection.
Yes.
So have you got?
Sławomir Mrożek, and who left the country eventually.
Right.
But he wrote satirical stuff,
Okay.
and it's kind of a comical way of criticising power.
Ah, yes.
And then, but then I have a writer called Marek Nowakovsky in the big anthology, who was also writing about that era in a sort of slightly comical, cynical way, but it was a way of criticising things in a roundabout way. I'm never quite sure what's been censored, because I was using a lot of old books that came out at the time.
Mm-hmm. Ah.
And sometimes you just don't know what's been taken out. On Chmielna Street, which is in central Warsaw, they have these wonderful stalls where these chaps who sell old books, and they know everything about everything, and I go and talk to them. And there's another area up in Żoliborz, which is in the Antonia Lloyd story, where there are these men with these funny little booths with just jam-packed with old books. And if I'm looking for something, they can find it for me, or they will, and then they'll press other things on me. So a lot of my research was done off those stalls. You know what I'm talking about. Yes, I love going and digging.
So does
around
that
in
mean,
these
because
places.
you were talking about, so people hid books and manuscripts and things when,
Well,
I mean,
there are,
or rescued, I mean, the war, when everything
there
was
are
bombed, I
some
mean,
things. I have a lot of funny books.
because libraries would have been destroyed
I
and
have
all of
books
that,
that
so
are
how things survive.
tiny, where they were printed and then published in a form with tiny, tiny, tiny letters and printed like that.
Tiny, yeah.
I've
like-
got books like that at home, or that were just for samizdat purposes. It was a way of distributing books that weren't allowed in
okay.
tiny format.
So
You
the
know,
whole
you
underground
first-
press, kind of
there's
underground.
a lot of, yeah. And I like those things. I like going to these flea markets where you can dig out these old books
Absolutely.
and you'll find all sorts of gems. Of course, a lot of them have been republished since. But one of my authors died last year, and we were talking the other day about perhaps we should all dig in our boxes.
The magic
because
boxes.
I've got things of his that were published in samizdat form during communism, and I don't know if anyone knows about them. There's time to gather together stuff. I've got things he sent me that he typed on typewriter.
We have 5 minutes left, so if we could wrap up. It was wonderful that you've all come. Two things. First of all, we have the next book club in November, second Monday of November. It's Clara Reads Proust, a young woman working for a hairdresser, who inadvertently, her lovely, rather elderly LGBTQ plus customer leaves a copy of Proust behind by mistake. And she happens to read it and falls in love with Proust and suddenly realises she's going out with a he-man. It's all image and no substance. I mean, it is a very, very charming, rather amusing, different way of looking at Proust. And then in December is Ismail Kadari, a great Albanian writer who's actually just died. He is particularly known for The General of the Dead Army, which is an extraordinary, huge
He's a brilliant
novel.
writer.
I don't know if that's been retranslated, but anyway, this is amazing. It's Stalin.
Phone Pasternak.
It's Pasternak. So
But
it's
he
and it's
also
really
wrote-
tyranny. Because it's a book club, and we appreciate you coming, but we are also we have parameters that unfortunately it's very frustrating. There are some wonderful, rather long books, and since we meet every month, I think it's only fair to ask everyone to read shorter books. So they tend to be under 275 pages, I'm afraid. But we hope at least it's an introduction to some wonderful writing from wonderful writers from around the world, and it's also rather different. So, let's hear about Europe, the Middle East, around the world. That's the idea, that we get actually another view. So thank you all for being wonderful. And thank you, Antonia, for